The Blueberries in Beni begin their almost impossible mission to create an army from a dubious collection of murderous ex-militia. If they succeed, it will rank as one of the most crucial achievements in their 50 years of history, which, as their critics keep reminding us, is not famous for its successes. The history of the men in blue is littered with failure. Their mandate to do good and keep the peace is blemished with accusations of incompetence, sex abuse, profiteering, even cowardice. In 1995, as the war in the Balkans was coming to an end, the town of Srebrenica in Bosnia fell to Serb forces. It made a mockery of the UN's commitment to safeguard the town. Then the Dutch contingent of Blueberries, there to protect the thousands of Muslim inhabitants, stood by as the Serbs carried out the systematic mass execution of over 7,000 men and boys. Women and girls were raped and beaten, and to their shame, the Blueberries did nothing to stop it.
We saw it, you and I saw it, Mike, painfully in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and many, many, many lost their lives because of it, when the international community became spectators in genocide, when their inability to take action, their lack of clear orders from the UN, their lack of proper coordination, meant that they were humiliated, and many British troops, many UN troops, were seriously scarred by events like Srebrenica, where they were required to withdraw instead of staying to do what soldiers should do, which is protect. And you saw soldiers coming back saying, I had to stand there while the people I was supposed to protect were being slaughtered.
In the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo, UN troops were used extensively in an attempt to keep the two warring sides apart. They did not, but they were repeatedly accused of corruption, black marketeering, drug and sex abuse.
The Ukrainian battalion in Sarajevo, while that city was starving and besieged, take out of that city about 6 million Deutschmarks from corruption. I saw them do it. I watched them trading. But listen, if you use low-quality troops to do this job, don't be surprised. The difficulty, it seems to me, isn't just that it happens. I'm not surprised it happens, given the quality of some of the people who are sent in, because we often send our worst, not our best. The difficulty is the UN won't take it seriously. The UN refuses to be transparent about it. The UN refuses to investigate it. The UN refuses to acknowledge when it happens and takes action in consequence. And that means it just goes on happening.
In the Sudan, a war that has lasted over 30 years, rather than deploy their own Blueberries, the UN subcontracted an African army. It has failed to keep the peace, failed to stop the killing, failed to end the refugee crisis. And the UN takes the blame.
If you're going to be using an African soldier in Darfur, living off nothing and being paid nothing because they can't afford to be paid, don't be surprised if they turn into something rather less than you'd hoped they'd be.
But the bloodiest stain on the Blueberries' reputation was in Rwanda in 1994. A Belgian contingent was sent to a college to protect thousands of Tutsis who were being threatened by a mob of Hutus. The Blueberries were then ordered to withdraw, and they left the Tutsis to their fate. Over 3,000 men, women and children were massacred in these college grounds. In response to the international outrage, the UN simply replied that it could not breach its mandate. Haiti has been another failure. The UN sent in its peacekeepers in 1994 following a bloody revolution and the overthrow of the Aristide regime. The Blueberries could not intervene militarily, and again they pleaded that the provisions of their mandate forbid it. Which is precisely their problem here in the Congo. The UN mandate that prevents these soldiers being soldiers, doing what these soldiers are trained to do, impose the peace. and when necessary use their firepower to do it. But they cannot. They dare not.
The role of the blue helmet is essentially a deterrent role. We are not warrior. The blue helmet are not warrior. People have extremely big difficulties to understand that a blue helmet is not a warrior.
The UN has already asked for a European expeditionary force that would not be hampered by the UN's own set of fighting restrictions, able to use its weapons to effect when it wanted to. When the opposing forces here know they could be hit by these kind of weapons, they might plump for a quieter life.
An expeditionary force is exactly what is needed here to do what the blueberries cannot or will not do. A force capable of imposing its will, having the military muscle and using it. Now, given that force, few people here doubt that this conflict could be settled very quickly indeed.
The result of the voting.
But Britain, France, Germany, the main players, have all said emphatically no.
Can you imagine that any defence minister or any prime minister in these circumstances would nominate 5,000, 2,000, 1,000 troops permanently to be with the UN, sitting kicking their heels, waiting to be deployed?
It is difficult to adequately describe what's happening here. There's not a single word that does. It's every human catastrophe rolled into one. So as governments play the blame game, the world turns a blind eye, trying to ignore the millions who struggle to survive the misery.